Railway workers will take part in a 3-day national strike later this month, which could cause major summer travel disruption across the UK.
Yeah, this is the RMT union saying it will shut down, that's their words, the country's railway network on the 21st, 23rd and 25th of June after talks over pay and redundancies fell through. This coming after tube strikes and GPs threatening to walk out over new opening times.
So what's behind this wave of strike action? Let's get more now from the economics commentator, Laurie Laird, and friend of the programme. Good morning to you, Laurie. What's your take on all of this?
You know, to a certain extent, this is inevitable. You tend to see a lot more strike action when a great percentage of the population is employed. So workers have a lot more power than they did, and the unemployment rate is very, very low. It's where it was pre-pandemic. A lot of people have left the workforce. That means Labour has a little bit more power than it has had over the past couple of years, past couple of decades, to be honest. Keep in mind, though, that union membership is so much lower, because the comparison is 1978, 1979, which you probably barely remember. But we're talking about it, that was the winter of discontent. Is this the summer of discontent? Difference is that fewer people, a lot less of the workforce is unionized. So that means that these stoppages will probably have less of an effect on our daily life.
50,000 workers, though, involved in this strike, potentially. Still a significant number.
Absolutely. But again, less unionized. Most of the unions are in the public sector, and they do have a grievance. Pay in the public sector is rising by about 1.5% a year, inflation at 9%. So you can see where the grievance comes from. But because so much less of the workforce is unionized, I think it'll have less of an effect than it did in the 1970s.
Yeah, and you said Labour have more power, as in the workforce, because so many more people are actually employed in jobs. But this time, the government is weakened after that vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister, which makes it they can bring forward industrial action.
And that's a very, very good point, because the government is in a tricky position. And as I mentioned, the most unionized parts of the workforce are in the public sector, education, transport. And so the person on the other side of the negotiating table essentially is the government. So we're going to have to see what the pain point is for the government with negotiating.
So do you think we're going to see the big comeback of unions then in the next few years as we're facing a cost of living crisis?
Isn't it? And the head of the unions have said, Sharon Graham, the head of Unite, the biggest union, has said this is a moment of rebirth for the unions. Very interesting question. I think that the situation that's changed is so many of us are now self-employed. About a fifth of the workforce is self-employed. So it's difficult for people to unionize in that way. If you think of delivery drivers, so many people are sole traders. Much more difficult to unionize, much more difficult to act together.
Class action, yeah.
So if you're Boris Johnson and you've got this big rail strike on the way...
That's a bit of a stretch.
How do you, or you're just the government, how do you deal with this then, with this rail strike? You know, because they want a pay rise, but the government are saying, well, no, we've put enough money into the railways now, you can't have a pay rise, we just simply can't afford it, and you need to modernise and be more efficient.
It's a tricky one because, again, pay rises in the public sector are so paltry. Pay rises are about 8% in the private sector. This is on a year-on-year basis, 1 and a bit percent in the public sector. So you can see where they're coming from. This government has said we want to avoid borrowing because we want to effect a tax rise before 2024, which is when we think the next election may be. Government is in a difficult position, but certainly you can see where the unions are coming from. I think the bigger question is, and I think this is what the government will pay attention to, is where do we as the public support these unions? It's one thing to say, look, these people are not getting a pay rise, they're losing money in real terms when you look at inflation. When will we get frustrated about this? And I think this government, will look at sort of public discontent, and that's how they'll decide how to deal with it.
Jim's got in touch on email. Good morning to you, Jim. He says, I'm really upset about this. I'm coming for a holiday from Australia next month, and I'm worried about my prepaid fares. Over here, if the trains go on strike, they don't affect the commuters. They open the gates and refuse to sell or check the ticket. That way, the public are not affected. Interesting.
Well, I noticed, I don't know if you guys did, but the tube strike earlier this week didn't cripple the transport system the way tube strikes in the past have. I had a lot of colleagues who actually managed to take the tube to get to work. And this is part of the problem with public transport. fewer of us are taking public transport to ridership. It's about 2/3 of where it was pre-pandemic. That means less money is going into Transport for London. They have less money to pay people. But we're not relying on public transport the way we did pre-pandemic.
Yeah, so the government has to put more money in, and that comes with terms attached, which is why we get the strikes, but that also reduces the power of those people to strike because less of us are relying on it. So it's kind of a
absolutely,
self-fulfilling
it's
thing.
circular. I can't see that the government won't have to settle at a higher pay rate. I mean, people really are taking a hit to their pay packets in real terms. Where that equilibrium is a very big question.
Well, it sounds like this is going to be a subject that we sort of see more and more of then, Laurie.
Absolutely, we'll watch
talking not just in rail, but wherever it might be. Unions are making a comeback. Good to talk to you, Laurie Laird. Thank you very much.
And also, just very quickly, I just want to read this from Jonathan in Liverpool, and it's a little bit of a long email, but it's important, and thank you for getting in touch with us this morning, Jonathan. He says, I'm a signaller for Network Rail, and I will be striking for the very first time with the RMT this summer. I'm really disappointed that the strike action announced has attracted such lazy stereotypes and comments from media, and particularly our useless politicians on all sides. Some media commentators have said we are overpaid. However, we have seen fares rise for the railway for years now, yet none of it has gone into pay for staff. Where is that money going? In Northern Ireland, we went to work every day throughout the pandemic in order to move the crucial freight that the country relies on. So pay rises for drivers, but not rail workers. While the government is trying to change our industry for the worst and thinks we should just sit idly by as inflation ramps up 10%, we're undervalued. People don't realise the huge responsibilities that I have, Jonathan has, the enormous risks I have to make under enormous pressure to keep things moving. No thanks at all from our useless government and supposed Labour MPs.
Roger says the people who want these strikes to go ahead seem not to care about ordinary people who just need to get to work so we have money to survive our costs. It's a fair point. Keep your thoughts coming in. We love to involve you in the conversation here on The Breakfast